he was young. He was like 18, 19, been doing Balloon his whole life. He's doing a demo in the Philippines with his instructor, and he's kind of showboating a little bit. He's playing to the crowd. He's not watching his instructor while they're, he's like playing to the crowd. And he said, and that's when I found out my instructor was left-handed. The instructor threw the stick in his left hand and beat the shit out of him,
We had a couple other topics. As long as everybody's cool with it, I would like to kind of move on to some bonus material. So we'll kind of move away from this. It's more things that I've experienced a lot in teaching. Here's the principle that we kind of like wrap around it. It's everything works, nothing works. The thought process is that everything works against somebody of no skill. And my father gave a different version of this. I'm not going to speak it. But if you just take somebody that is not athletic, probably not the smartest person in the world, has no background, it's first day, they just did triathlon, whatever, and you try something on them, it'll work. I don't care what it is. You pick it up from YouTube, it's absolutely going to work. Then nothing works, because if you ever tried to do something that's legitimate to your coach, you could try and have an amazing technique, and that person's still going to shut it down because they are better than you.
I'm sitting
what?
I'm sitting right.
I'm sorry. You need a hug? There's a number of stories that I could throw out there to emphasize this. Not all including Ben, but Carlos had a student that had just won the Worlds the weekend prior, and I was visiting him the week after, and that gentleman walked through the door, and I recognized him, and I just saw him just crush everybody. And the thing was, I was a purple belt at the time. I'm like, oh my god, I'm so excited, and Carlos was going to roll that night, and you knew when Carlos was going to roll. And the thing was, he was teaching this paper cutter choke. You reach underneath the shoulder, you grab the collar, right? And he had a different way of doing it. And he was teaching escapes, whatever. And so this guy came on the mat, and there was a break. And Carlos goes, "Would you like to roll? I just saw you, And so what happened was, he goes, "Of course." So they touch, and Carlos grabs his collar, knee taps him, takes him to the ground, gets a side control, reaches underneath, like slow as he demonstrated it, reach underneath. And the whole time, the guy's just trying to get out, he's doing all of this stuff. And it's just like, you're seeing this like sloth moving, and then this like Tasmanian devil. And then he's just slowly getting, and he reached underneath, grabbed the collar, reached over, grabbed the opposite collar, and then there's slow, steady pressure, and then there's a tap, right? And so Carlos always apologizes after he taps you. It is the most annoying thing ever. It is just like, dude, if you could just stop doing that, I would feel less humiliated. But he apologizes, like, "I'm sorry. Was that too much?" And he's just like, "No." And he goes, "Do you know how to get out of that?" Like, the dude just won Worlds, right? And he goes, "Yeah, I think so." He goes, "Yeah, you just put your elbow," and then he had to practice it a couple times. So like all of this happened in the span of like 2 minutes. And then he goes, "Go again." So yes, touch knuckles. He knee taps in the other direction, the exact same way that he did it this way. He went that way. And then he reaches under, grabs a collar, reaches across, taps him up. And he goes, "Would you like to practice on this side to of course he apologized. And he goes, no, let's just go again." And then he touches knuckles, and then he goes in the first direction. He knee tap, the exact same thing. Everything was the exact same thing, And Carlos goes, "It's just unfair. I've been practicing this for the last 3 days with the black belts, and this is the first day that you get." Like he just gave a full on, just it's okay. Like you probably you did as well as you possibly could, and the thing was that at that moment I was like, that was boring. Like like there was so much information that came in from that experience, but at the same time, it was like, that was the most anticlimactic thing. I know that Carlos could tap people out, and he didn't even pick up speed. He didn't switch. There was nothing special.
Right.
All he did was he just used the technique he just taught.
Yeah.
You know. But the thing was, is it falls under this. It's like everything works, nothing works. Every single escape that guy used, he would have gotten on any other black belt that had come through. You know. So the thing is that it comes up a lot. That wouldn't work on me, or that wouldn't work. There's these two different statements, and my issue with it comes in on, of course not. First off, you just saw it, right? And you are thinking about that environment. The other thing is that the average altercation does not happen with somebody that is scouring YouTube and instructionals on an hourly basis. So how do we get past all of that? And is that something you face a lot?
Well, I think, and obviously there's exceptions, but I think most of those comments come from people that don't train. Because if you actually train, then you understand all the dynamics that go around why that will or won't work.
Mhm.
You know, you understand the push-pull energy that's you understand, okay, look, I'm isolating this thing for this video or this demonstration or whatever, but there's a lot that goes on around it to actually get us to the point where it does work.
Right.
The timing of it matters. The setup of it matters. It's like, do cartwheel passes work? Well, yeah. I mean, right timing, you know, and you can pull them off on good people if the timing is right and the setup is right and all that kind of stuff. Is it the first pass you should learn? Probably not. You know, is it the 30th? Probably not. But it does work. Everything works and everything doesn't. Techniques work, techniques fail. Like that's just the way it is.
It depends.
And I think, but I do think that it's mostly people that either don't train or they trained in some bullshit that didn't have like real resistance to it. You know, it was Aikido or, you know, not to say that you can't get something from some of those arts and styles, but they're not touching hands and actively and regularly having somebody trying to stop them from doing the thing that they want to do and vice versa. And so I think when you get like in our training centers, every now and then you get newer people and, well, and so we did it this way or whatever. And I don't think that would work against, you know, and I'm usually just like, well, you know, maybe it wouldn't work on you. I think if you give it some time and you put some pressure on it and you have somebody put some pressure back on you and you kind of understand really the dynamics of the principles that drive this technical application, I think you'll find that it works more often than not, but it's always going to be dependent on the situation, the context.
Yeah. And things that don't work actually will work through strong discipline.
Yeah.
You know, like everybody makes fun of martial arts and blocking, you know, but the thing is that I have dealt with enough people that are high level at sparring that within that field, they use those techniques to great success because that's all they do. And they actually could pressure check that. And the thing is that their 1,000 hours that was dedicated to that could have been devoted to something better. But the thing is that they didn't. Like there are tournaments that are on video of, Japan working against Okinawa and in the peaceful dynamic, where the Japanese who were taught by the Okinawans that this is a block, it wasn't grabbing, it wasn't grappling, and the Japanese in turn practicing that over a very long period of time, winning tournaments against Okinawans, using techniques that the Okinawans taught to them as bullshit, but in turn they practiced it enough that they beat them with it. And it's like, okay, so there's a lesson to be learned inside that one too. Like, you know, it's an intellectual, I guess, exercise for you to sit there and be like, hey, what actually works? And does it work for you? Does it work for the time that you're allotted? Very, very rarely should you actually make a definitive that is complete and utter BS unless you have some scientific reasoning to place behind it.
Well, I mean, even if you look at still high-level MMA, probably 90% of the fights are ended one of 5 ways. Still, best guys in the world, they know how to defend a triangle or straight arm bar or being mounted and punched in the face and then don't turn your back and don't get choked. But how do most of those fights end? The things that really work in a real fight, that with regularity and consistency and that is repeatable over time, you probably can write on the back of a postage stamp, but that doesn't mean that all this other does an MNRE roll work? Yeah. But I saw a dude do one in combat jiu-jitsu a couple weeks ago, and the dude on top just went wow and knocked him unconscious. So the timing, right? The timing matters.
Right.
The dude that you're trying to apply it on, that matters. What's that background? What's his attributes? All that kind of stuff is. I told you I trained a good bit with Grandmaster Bobby Tawada years ago. He had a similar story to what you talked about with Machado. He was young. He was like 18, 19, been doing Bullet Walk his whole life. He's doing a demo in the Philippines with his instructor, and he's kind of showboating a little bit. He's playing to the crowd. He's not watching his instructor while they're, he's like playing to the crowd. And he said, and that's when I found out my instructor was left-handed. The instructor threw the stick in his left hand and beat the shit out of him. So I mean, it's like there's levels, and things will work, but it's a sliding scale.
I just to add to that before I move on to question number 2. I don't know if it came from Carlos, but it was something that obviously I've talked to Ben about. We have these long conversations. Everyone talks about skill as like levels, which a lot of times people relate it to like a staircase, right? And I'm not sure if it was with Carlos. It was somewhere around my development that the thought process was, it's more of a ladder. The thing is that that the person's better than you. You may sense that you're close to them, and that may be the next ring up. But the thing is that you could get to that next point and realize, oh, I'm still not there. And then if you were truly to do a back, like to pull away, you could see that it was 20 more up. But, it's different than a staircase, because a staircase, at least you have a projection of, that's there. It's kind of like the whole iceberg theory, right? Like the thing is that it's like, oh, I know he's better, but I just don't know how much is actually, underneath the water. There's a lot of analogies that you can kind of play with it. It's just that the levels thing, the understanding that when somebody is better than you, you have absolutely no comprehension of that. But I always thought that was a good analogy of it as you're working in. Couple quotes from Musashi. You should not have a favorite weapon. To become over familiar with one weapon is as much a fault as not knowing it sufficiently well. I relate this not only to weapons, and I add things that are weapons, such as your mind, that probably was not applied to this quote. I add ranges. Like the thing is that when you learn the clinch range, grappling range, striking range, that also applies to ballistic ranges, right? Knife fighting ranges, long distance shooting ranges. Like all of this should be part of your development if you truly, truly, truly apply into it. What he's talking about is becoming over familiar and attached to an area. Right. And then what happens is by doing so, you are dishonest with, your capabilities, because you draw fights into areas that strategically may not be the best, thing to do. So thoughts on that?
Well, when you said you carry a gun everywhere you go, I do. I carry a pistol with me pretty much everywhere that I legally can.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't carry that gun, I do have some kind of a blade. On the rare occasion that I do some kind of a trip where I end up in a spot where customs is going to take my blades, well, I just go to a restaurant and order a steak, and then I have a knife in my pocket for the rest of the night. Just one of those things where and familiarity with that to that Outback Steakhouse, cutting tool, as opposed to my regular everyday carry. There's something to be said for that.
Yeah, and there's also something to be said about being honest, right? Like the thing is that if I showed up to your house and you tell me that you eat EDC, you know, and I get there's a funny term to that, but like if you carry a pistol everywhere and at all times or whatever, and I show up at your house, you know, after a really long day, and you open up the door and I go, you know, pistol check, and you don't have it on you, you legitimately cannot say that you always have a pistol on you.
Right.
There are many, many times when you don't have a pistol on you. There are many times that it makes no sense to you. Let's be honest. There are many, many times that even if you're like, no, one in the chamber all the time, it's like, there are many times where that is not something that people are comfortable doing. And it's not looking down on them, mainly because in a lot of scenarios that you can think about, it's like, would I really, really, really absolutely need a 0.5 second response to a scenario and I couldn't rack around? Or the fact of, it's very hard to get my wife to even carry a knife, nevertheless carry a pistol on her or in her purse, and then you want to be like Glock versus SIG, manual safety versus not. You know, in turn, you know, now she's gonna have it bounce around the purse, and in turn, you're like, I want her to have a round in the chamber. There's all these factors that come into it, and people really hard set on something, and it's like, don't, just be honest. Like in most scenarios, you probably have something on you or near you that could be used as a weapon to upgrade your scenario. But it should be talked about that you can't just say like that, you know, I'm always prepared, just like the whole vigilance thing. Do not collect weapons or practice with weapons beyond what is useful. Also falls under this. You know, the idea is that
You got two hands.
Yes.
and once again, practicing something too much past the point of usability is, you know, a lot of people don't like this one because it's like, I have 15 ARs. It's like, hey, good to go.
Cool.
You're statistic.
You're ready.
Yeah.
You know, you can only carry so many pistols on you. Why do you have 50 pistols?
Right.
You know, why do you have a very expensive, you know, 365? Because I don't have 5 pistols I put all my money into, you know. But there's all the thought process behind that. Anything to add?
I think just understanding that, you know, if you are leaving your house, I just like to have a solution at several ranges. You know, when you're talking about range and distance, like if somebody is 15 feet away from me and pulls out a pistol, it's like, there's nothing I can do to take that pistol. I can't close the distance. I can't. My only solution is do what they tell me to do until I can get some type of cover between us or get off line and get to my own pistol where I have a tool to match that distance.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't, then you know
I got into a discussion one
you
time
just
with
have to
a
wing it at that point.
kind of famous individual within our community. His name is Billy Waugh, and he would tell stories about getting in some crazy scenarios, and you're like, Billy, how'd you get out of that? He's like, I ran.
Yeah.
I ran.
Yeah.
I remember that being like such a novel thing to
Yeah.
hear from being like a young assaulter, where
Right.
it's like, there's no role. You talking about running?
Yeah.
You know,
Well, anybody that's been to a range has seen the proficiency of most people at 25 yards.
And that's with no stress and
Yeah.
shooting at paper.
yeah,
You know?
it's not moving.
Because I
It's
joke
not, yeah.
sometimes that like if I can just run 25 yards, I'm like, take my time to respond to it. But
So this is something that this is a mindset question for bonus question 3. Bruce Lee has this saying that's pretty famous, talking about taking the good out of something, leaving the bad. Most of you already know my thoughts on it. Musashi has a quote that doesn't counter it, but basically speaks on my thought on it, and I want everybody's opinion. A man cannot understand the art he is studying if he only looks for the end result without taking the time to delve deeply into the reasoning of this study. So in other words, it is impossible to truly understand what is truly good about something if you do not understand why the bad stays over time. It is a study of martial arts. It's a study of any reasoning. You want to study CQB and go, that's a complete other whatever. You need to understand where it came from, why it was developed at the time, and why those tactics were applied. Same thing about different ways of or strategies of holding, drawing a pistol, all this other stuff. Same thing with knife fighting. Same thing like with your system. I feel like I understand a lot about the mindset that's placed into that, and I completely understand the reasoning why you would do that, and I would like to spend more time studying your mind. Like that's important. There's no judgment on how it's taught, mainly because I have no right. There is no right to do that, but it is an interesting topic. And there's no way for me to go through your system and go, I'm just going to take the good stuff that Ryan put in there,
Right.
But let's talk about that, because that's a quote that is consistently thrown out there. I'm like, people just don't even understand what the hell they're talking about.
So I get this a lot because, I have a pretty extensive background in Krav Maga. Co-authored 3 books on it. I was on an advisory board for a very big organization. And so when I broke away and we started doing our own thing, one of the first things we did do was start removing things that I felt were superfluous. They didn't fit for the goal sets. And so, I'm I don't know, 10, 12 years removed now, maybe a little bit more. And so I constantly will hear from Krav Maga people that don't know that part of things. Well, you just don't understand Krav Maga. No, bro, I intimately understand Krav Maga. I spent a lot of my adult life in that world. I've worked with some of the best on the planet. So I didn't just say, "Oh, that's bullshit." I spent a lot of time understanding why it was there, why whoever put it there, Emi, whoever it was, and sometimes it was literally he put it there because it was something that he liked doing, that he enjoyed. It worked for him. He brought in the thing that people will try to romanticize with Emi, and you see this with Helio some too. People see Emi and they see this old man. They don't see, well, he was a national champion gymnast, he was a national champion wrestler, he was a national champion boxer, he was a street thug. Like, he was constantly getting in street fights. He was a world-class athlete. He was a jacked dude. He was small, but he was ripped. He wasn't this frail old man that you see in the late 90s that everybody says, well, see, size and strength doesn't matter. You don't have to be an athlete. Everything he developed when he was a badass. And I think there's some parallels there with Helio. Right. And so what I saw was, look, this is a dude that he boxed, he wrestled, he was a gymnast. And 30 years later, because of business or marketing or commercializing or whatever, things were made a little bit more palatable. People didn't want to, on day one, start pummeling, right? Because that's uncomfortable. And so things that seemed like magic pills were more emphasized because they look cool in demos. You could go to the movie theater when the Enough is premiering, and you can do all these demos, and people are like, oh, J-Lo, blah blah, and we're gonna eye gouge some orange halves and whatever. And so, bro, I've seen it all. And so when I started removing things, and we put things back in, but when I started removing things, that was the common refrain that I would hear 5 years later when people didn't know the amount of time that I spent in this. Now, I wouldn't go to Jeet Kune Do and be like, look, you need to get rid of that and that and that. If it's something that I don't understand, because there's a lot of parallels through arts and systems. I mean, any good system has similar things in them. But I'm not going to just cherry pick things that I don't think belong because I don't understand them, or I've seen it in a demo, but I don't know the context around it. So I wholly understand what you're talking about here.
Well, the context is massive. Yeah. It's kind of everything in my mind, right? So, I'm actually curious about the thing that you've kind of put together. myself and an Australian counterpart, we kind of came up together and then became instructors together.
Mhm.
And we're into fighting and other things. And want to be guest instructors at each other's schools for a while, where we were teaching, or my school, or his school. But we ended up putting our own thing together ourselves, and it's because we saw something that we felt was lacking. But what we weren't doing was trying to teach you a system. We're actually creating a filter. We're creating a way to test and validate whatever it was that an individual is working on, and draw out those mental barriers that you might not know you haven't addressed yet. That was the sole purpose of what we're doing. It wasn't to teach you this technique that's going to unzone somebody across the room and win. If you bring your own technique and do that, that's awesome. But to stand outside and look in, and we ran into this a little bit until people got to spend a little time and like watch it. People wondering like why we weren't teaching certain things. Yeah. But they just didn't understand what we were doing and what we were specifically trying to address. Because you sit around the table, you go, okay, well, you know a whole lot of Krav. This guy knows something, this guy knows something, this guy knows something, and she knows something. So I can enter this room, go through a scenario, and then identify where I'm weak and where I'm lacking. Right. And I can turn around and go back to my friends and go, hey man, my stand-up's not really good. Could you show me something? Like this guy like just like chucks me over there, and you know. Mm-hmm. That's all we were doing. And so understanding like the motives behind the system or the platform or whatever is important.
Yeah. And I mean, so we'll have people come in all the time that maybe they've got a big wrestling background. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not going to try to undo 10 years of wrestling. You've got things that work for you. Yeah. Okay. So let me give you some principled ideas to kind of make what you're doing already fit into a self-defense kind of context. Because now maybe it doesn't make sense we can still hit a double leg, but let's not do a deep penetration step and slam our knee down on asphalt, you know. But I'm not trying to rebuild you from scratch. It doesn't make sense. Like it's silly. Now, if I get somebody who comes in from yellow bamboo, then, you know, we're going to have to probably reprogram and, you know, go back to square one. But
is that a real place?
YouTube.
Okay.
Check that stuff out. Raw.
Yeah.
But,
so there's
yellow bamboo.
Start throwing things under the bus.
No, that's one that's you'll feel okay throwing under.
Yeah. I accept all people. So a lot of times for me, it's understanding where things come from. So like there are similarities to what you just said with jiu-jitsu, but there are more similarities between what you said and Aikido. And even though people make fun of Aikido, like the originator of it, the system was completely different pre-World War II. In fact, it was amazing before World War II. He had a mindset that was violent, and he went from place to place and crushed instructors because he felt they were weak and he felt that they were teaching things wrong. And he had strikes and he had joint locks and breaks, and he had all the violent stuff that you would have in what would be a traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu martial art that was designed for samurai during wartime, right? So like, once again, two different time periods, like when you learn Japanese jiu-jitsu. World War II happens, and he sees the atrocities that happen, and he has a complete different change. There's just a change of heart. Like he's like, no, and he takes everything that would be amazing about Aikido and turns it into something that is free flowing. And the thing is there great value in it? Absolutely. There's so much that you can learn in Aikido if you were to truly study it. For you to say that it is a one-off so that you only need Aikido, then there would be question on it. You know, it's just, but there's similarities there. With the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community, I'll stay away from that just a little bit, just because that's a deep subject. It depends on if you want to buy into some stuff.
But I think the biggest problem with jiu-jitsu and judo too is competition. I love competition. I think it's great, but competition has killed what made those systems and styles legitimate self-defense systems.
Right, but that's my point about martial arts is judo was derived from Japanese jiu-jitsu in a time where there was no need for the combat art of getting to your sword and destroying someone from getting close enough to stop you from accessing that weapon system. It would be the equivalent of, having someone that had a firearm, and the easiest way to deal with them is to make sure they don't pull that firearm. Like everything that is revolved around that is a combat effective. I'm going to chop you in half with a 4-foot razor blade. Why do I even care what happens to you? So everything is efficient. It's always tested on live humans, like peasants got, like I have a technique. Go grab Bob outside and just like break his shit. Oh, it didn't break the way I thought it would. He didn't react the way. Let's go back to the ground floor. Hey, Jimmy has a technique he thinks is going to work. You go to war. All of a sudden, Jimmy doesn't come back. I guess that technique didn't work. Like there's a trial and error in that time. But when things become peaceful, it's like judo was developed in a time where all those skills were going away. And you may have the potential of losing the warrior mindset.
The why.
So you repurpose the why so that you put something in the school system so that there's still a combat art in there that has a reason to be there. So you take away all of the striking, you take all of the throws that end in a catastrophic injury or whatever it is. You create a system that allows really small children and adults to do whatever. You create competitions, points, blah, 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 blah. And then in turn, what happens? You have judo. Now, can judo be used for self-defense? Absolutely. But then again, so can wrestling. If you double leg someone on their skull on concrete, then guess what? That's an effective technique. Is that what it's meant for? Absolutely not. So you can repurpose things. But that's the thing about it is like you should know why things develop the way they do. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I absolutely love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I feel like there are skill sets that you learn in Jiu-Jitsu, especially Nogi, that you just cannot absorb without truly focusing on it. Like you really have to know it's there and you have to like focus on it and absorb it. It just naturally happens in Jiu-Jitsu. But it also happens in many, many other things. And the thing is that a good instructor will be able to pull that directly out. But jiu-jitsu is not something that was born in a combat time, right? So like the idea that it was for self-defense and that's all it was for, like it was born on the streets and like that's where everybody trained. It's like, no, you trained on the mats. You trained in a controlled environment and it was passed on to you by a judo guy. So like the thing is that like you have that essence of competition. So the things that you're talking about that are inherent to competition that are negative, you also have to understand are just in the genes of that art. Is that good, bad? I don't know. Like there's a whole level of that conversation. But to ignore that and to just go, this is the most effective self-defense system, is ignorant in a way. Because the question is like, how much do you actually know? I know like 3 different versions of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from Brazil to America story from like 3 different like 8th and 9th degree black belts, and they're all different and they highlight and anyways, maybe we get into that. We ran out of time. I am humbled by the fact that everyone engaged in conversation and is willing to talk like this. That's what this is about. I would really like to invite many, many different mentors and just get them on that. It's not argument. It's just talking about what you believe and not having an issue with the other person. Like our society as a whole has lost that ability to talk about something that you have a different viewpoint from and then have somebody else give their thoughts without you thinking badly about, what will happen to them when they leave the conversation. It's like, I hate your soul because you don't think the way I do. It's like, well, in order for them to change their thought process, we have to have conversations like this. And I am very thankful that everyone here was willing to do it on camera, because it does show, regardless of how it happened in conversation, there are many times where I feel that I did it, and I feel like each individual person here did it, where they spoke on something and the context was a little bit off, and then we may have learned something there. So thank you guys. I know that we've been talking for a long time, so I think we'll close it off with that.
Thanks.
Yeah.